We are coming to you live this very hour as breathtaking new developments emerge from deep inside the palace. There are explosive files sitting right now within a confidential royal investigation that have accomplished something nobody in that building has managed to do in 30 years. They have left King Charles completely unable to defend the woman he spent his entire life fighting for. Not because he does not want to shield her, but because he actually read what was contained inside those pages. And what he read was not a simple mistake, a casual oversight, or a minor communication gap. It was a meticulous, detailed, patient plan, years in the making, constructed carefully in the hidden spaces where nobody was ever supposed to look, and designed to permanently secure Camilla's supreme position inside this institution. Not just for the remainder of Charles's life, but stretching far into the decades that come after it, inside a kingdom that will eventually be ruled by a man she has spent 25 years being deeply afraid of. I'm Harold, and live right here. I spend my time digging through everything that moves around this family, the official records, the classified inquiry documents, and the investigative reporting that got buried deep before anyone could finish asking the hard questions. What you are hearing right now is me putting these critical pieces together the way I read them live, completely unpolished by any official palace press release. To truly understand what these heavy files actually represent, you have to look back at the precarious position Camilla was sitting in before a single line of them was ever written. She entered this royal family as the most resented woman in all of Britain, and that is not a matter of opinion, but of documented public record. When Charles and Camilla finally married back in April 2005, the nation had spent 8 solid years reliving Diana's funeral footage and digesting every raw detail that spilled out of the official inquests that followed. The public knew the exact shape of the affair. They knew every word of the Panorama interview, they knew what Diana had famously declared about there being 3 people in that marriage, and they knew precisely who the third one was. Camilla understood all of this stark reality. She is far from a stupid woman, and she has never been a naive one either. She knew walking into that Windsor ceremony was not the grand finale of her struggles, but rather the terrifying beginning of the longest, steepest rehabilitation project the British monarchy had attempted since the abdication crisis of 1936. And she set about executing it with a cold patience and fierce discipline that outsiders can scarcely comprehend. And that is the pivotal fact you have to credit before going any further into this story. By the time Charles was officially crowned in May 2023, the woman standing tall beside him was no longer the universally despised figure the public had loathed for a decade. She was a queen consort whom the country had more or less arrived at accepting. That monumental shift took 20 years of careful positioning, endless charity patronages, showing up to say all the right things, and staying entirely silent whenever silence was what the volatile moment demanded. But here is the catch: every single piece of that massive rehabilitation was built entirely on Charles. On his royal title, his fierce protection, and his willingness to weaponize the supreme authority of his office to stand directly between her and an institution historically notorious for discarding anyone it finds inconvenient. She had no independent power base inside that family whatsoever. None. She had Charles, the shelter of his shadow, and the comforting assumption that he would always be there to provide it. But over the last 2 years, live sources confirmed that foundational assumption began to violently crack. When Charles received his cancer diagnosis in February 2024, he maintained a dignified silence on the specifics while continuing to work at a commendable pace, yet everyone inside those walls understands precisely what a serious, debilitating illness does to the internal balance of power within an institution that runs exclusively on personal authority. It shifts the center of gravity quietly, without press releases, moving it directly toward the individual physically well enough to occupy the room every single day. And right now, live observers note, that person is Prince William. And so, live sources reveal, she started planning. The explosive files were never discovered through any dramatic, movie-style act of investigation. That is the very first thing you need to understand about how this whole structure came apart. Nobody broke into a secure office in the dead of night, and nobody intercepted a secret message. The discovery happened entirely because of a routine legal review. The kind of dry administrative process that hums quietly in the background of any large institutional estate and generates paperwork that nobody ever intends to read carefully. The review was triggered by a standard, recurring audit of patronage arrangements connected directly to the Duchy of Lancaster. For those unfamiliar, the Duchy of Lancaster is the sovereign's private estate, generating personal income for the reigning monarch while maintaining administrative links to a wide range of royal charitable structures. That critical flag went straight to a senior palace administrator, who read what was contained in the folder and made an urgent phone call that, by every account I have been able to piece together live, visibly shook the person on the other end. That person was sitting right inside William's office. And this is the vital detail that tells you everything about where absolute power actually resides in that building right now. The frantic call did not go to the King's private secretary first. It went straight to Kensington Palace. Whether that was a deliberate choice or a direct reflection of where the officer believed real authority now operated, the ultimate effect was identical. William had the damning information long before Charles ever caught wind of it. He sat with the files for 2 full days, 48 hours in which he meticulously read every single page of what had been uncovered. He had his own elite legal team review the documents word for word, building a precise, unshakable understanding of what he was looking at before deciding his next move. Then, he walked into a private meeting with his father and placed a thick folder heavily on the table. But before we get to the tense details of that meeting, you need to understand what was actually inside those files, because the casual summary circulating around the palace in the weeks since is accurate only as far as it goes. It does not go far enough. And the yawning distance between that summary and the full, unfiltered picture is the difference between a woman making cautious preparations and a woman running a multi-year, strategic operation inside her own husband's royal household. The files contained 4 distinct categories of material, and while each one taken in isolation might be easily explained away, lined up together they formed an undeniable pattern. The first category was strictly legal, specific documents detailing the establishment of a brand new, private charitable foundation under Camilla's personal name, structured deliberately to give it independent operational status regardless of any future changes to the wider royal household. In plain terms, it was a foundation designed to keep running and keep generating massive institutional standing for Camilla even after the conditions supporting her royal position fundamentally shifted. The sophisticated legal structure had been drawn up by a prestigious firm with long-standing connections to royal household advisors, and it had been in active preparation for at least 3 years. Now, a foundation is not inherently suspicious on its own. Senior royals established charities all the time as a normal part of institutional life. What was entirely abnormal was the specific legal. It had been engineered to be structurally independent of the crown in a way that standard royal charities never are. While most derive their weight directly from the reigning family, this one was deliberately built so its prestige and survival would endure even if that royal connection was completely severed. Someone had thought very carefully about what happens to Camilla's public standing in a future world where William is king and is fundamentally disinclined to support her. The second category focused heavily on patronages, a detailed list of specific charitable patronages, some currently held by other members of the royal family, complete with attached personal notes outlining exactly how each one might be smoothly transitioned over to Camilla's independent foundation in the event of a sudden household restructure. Even more shocking, some of those very patronages had originally belonged to Diana. Stop and sit with that heavy reality for a second, because it is far from a minor detail. Diana built those patronages out of genuine, raw personal commitment, hospices, AIDS wards, and landmine clearance campaigns. She gave those organizations something that could never be manufactured or borrowed, her own emotional presence and the profound love of the British public. Some of those exact same organizations had been in the process of being quietly revived under Catherine's office in recent months. As we have covered live, finding them listed in Camilla's covert succession planning files, annotated with cold transition strategies, is the kind of detail that lands with devastating weight depending on which woman's name you read them under. The third category contained residential notes focusing strictly on the legal status of Clarence House and the exact conditions under which it would remain available for Camilla to occupy long after Charles's death. This category was the most straightforward of the four, as every senior royal naturally thinks about residential logistics, and having legal advice on housing is hardly unusual. The clever legal minds who wrote them had actively been searching for a backdoor around William's strict authority on the matter, firmly believing they had successfully found one. But live experts confirmed they had not. William's elite legal team systematically dismantled and demolished that illusion within 44 hours. Yet it was the fourth and final category that fundamentally altered the temperature of the private room where King Charles eventually read it all: personal correspondence. It was not a massive volume of letters, but they were specific enough and recent enough that they could never be brushed off as old planning or historical caution. These were private letters exchanged between Camilla's most senior advisor and two influential figures operating entirely outside the royal household, an operation that required her to think with cold clarity and practical precision about a future world where he was gone. One that demanded she quietly make independent arrangements, cultivate hidden outside allies, and construct legal structures, all conducted within the intimate spaces of their shared life without ever uttering a word of it to him. Whether she convinced herself it was merely responsible forward planning for a woman whose entire security inside a ruthless institution depended entirely on one man's failing health, or whether she told herself he would surely understand if he only knew and that she was simply sparing him a difficult conversation, none of that changes how damning it looked on paper. And Charles, who has read enough dense legal briefs in his lifetime to instantly grasp the full scope of what he was looking at, read every single line with crystal clear eyes. He sat alone in his private study for hours after the folder was finally closed, locked in a silence that no one inside those walls dared to interrupt. His private secretary was outside the heavy door, and nobody went in. The entire staff afforded him the space that experienced palace personnel learn to provide a man who needs to be alone with something monumental, which is to say they vanished so completely that the corridor felt as though it had never held a soul. When he finally emerged, he instructed his private secretary to schedule a meeting with William. Not for later that day, but for the following morning. And then he retreated back inside. That evening, he did not join Camilla for dinner. The official explanation given to the household staff was that he was managing acute fatigue related to his ongoing medical treatment. The people who were actually working in the building that night, however, whispered something entirely different. They reported that he simply could not bring himself to sit across that dinner table from her yet, that he required one more night of solitude before he had to look her in the eye while carrying the weight of what he now knew. That is not the behavior of a man dealing with a minor administrative hiccup. That is the reaction of a man who has just read text that fundamentally fractured how he views his own marriage. Now, we must look further back, because the files that surfaced during this audit did not materialize out of thin air. Camilla did not construct this extensive operation alone, and to understand who assisted her, you have to look closely at the household she has spent the better part of a decade assembling. Senior members of the royal family maintain independent households, private secretaries, communications teams, and trusted advisors who owe their professional standing entirely to the specific royal they serve. This structure fosters fierce personal loyalty because an individual's entire career, salary, reputation, and access to one of the most exclusive institutions on earth flow through a single entrance. Camilla's household was methodically built around people whose professional futures are tightly bound to hers. In a world where William is Prince of Wales and subsequently King, the people whose futures carry the highest risk are those who staked everything on Camilla's ongoing relevance. Consequently, the motivation to help her plan was driven less by blind professional loyalty and more by sheer institutional survival. The advisor whose personal letters surfaced in those files had served Camilla for 11 years, arriving with a background in political communications. That background meant he understood something that traditional palace lifers often miss: a public figure's power is never fixed. It can be manufactured, defended, and, if handled with enough tactical brilliance, made to endure even when the structural pillars beneath it have crumbled. He had observed William's systemic consolidation of power for years. He watched Prince Andrew step back, Prince Harry depart, the extended family circle shrink, and the traditional court structure tighten. He recognized long before most insiders what the future monarchy under William would look like, and he understood there was no guaranteed place in it for a woman whose entire continuation depended on the protection of a dying king. So, he began constructing one. The independent charitable foundation, the coordinated patronage strategy, the residential documents, and the discreet letters to outside allies were entirely calculated. None of it was improvised. Every single page reflected someone who thoroughly analyzed the looming threat and systematically worked through every available mechanism. Whether Camilla directed every phase personally or whether her advisor anticipated her wishes and overstepped is a massive question that nobody inside the palace has yet answered definitively. It is the exact question Charles has wrestled with since turning the last page of that folder, because the distinction changes everything. King Charles is sitting tonight in the very same building as the woman he has loved for 50 long years. The heavy folder is tightly closed. The incriminating files now rest securely in an evidence room deep within the palace administrative system. Outside the towering windows, the ancient institution grinds on exactly as it always has. The motorcades, the official engagements, the carefully crafted press statements, and the meticulously arranged public appearances of a family that never, under any circumstances, conducts its most critical business in public view. Inside, a man who has spent his entire adult life choosing this woman is sitting alone with the devastating knowledge that she was actively planning for a world without him, and that her planning was detailed enough, careful enough, and advanced enough that an outside officer had to flag it as a dangerous problem before he ever had a single clue it existed. Princess Diana wrote a prophetic letter to her solicitor back in October of 1995. She wrote that she was deeply afraid of what was being plotted around her behind her back and without her knowledge. She wrote about feeling utterly unprotected inside an institution that was supposed to function as her family. She was entirely right to be afraid, and nobody with the actual authority to act on her warnings lifted a finger for 6 agonizing years. Her eldest son now wields that absolute authority. And when a compromising document finally surfaced that told him something critical about what was being engineered inside his own family behind his back, he read every word on the exact day it arrived. He comprehended its full scope instantly and walked it straight into a room where it could never, ever be swept under the rug. Diana would instantly recognize that execution. She would recognize the boy she raised and the powerful man who carried it out. The son she sat down with to tell the raw truth when the truth was the hardest thing a child could ever hear. She gave him that invaluable gift, the deep-seated conviction. That is precisely where this epic story ends, live viewers. Not with a cinematic shouting match, not with a public confrontation, an official statement, or a leaked press release, but with a single confidential document locked away in an evidence room, a man who read the truth before his father ever laid eyes on it, and a reigning king sitting tonight beneath the crushing weight of knowing what was secretly constructed inside his own house. The heavy silence hanging in the air after all of this is far from empty. It never is within the House of Windsor. It is utterly brimming with everything nobody dares to speak aloud yet. And in that family, what remains unsaid always has a ruthless way of becoming the next major catalyst that changes everything forever.